Today, we're joined by two visionaries doing exactly that. Justine Stilborn and Eli Hirtle of the Indigenous Curatorial Collective are reimagining what cultural preservation looks like in a modern world, where art, activism, and ancestral knowledge converge. From film and storytelling to grassroots community work, their mission is bold yet deeply rooted to ensure that Indigenous culture doesn't just survive, it thrives. This is Beyond the Art, where stories become legacy and legacy becomes future. Welcome to the show. Well, Eli and Teeny, which I'll call you Teeny, or Justine, the Indigenous Curatorial Collective has a rich history since its founding in 2005. Can you share how the ICCA began and how it's evolved to meet the needs of Indigenous artists and curators today?
I'll start by introducing myself, if that's okay. Tanse Ninto Tamak Eli Hirtle Nisi Kasan.
Sure, certainly.
That's just me introducing myself in Nehiwewin, the Cree language. I'm Cree on my mother's side and a mix of settler, mostly British and German on my father's side. I first interacted with the Indigenous Curatorial Collective when it was called the Aboriginal Curatorial Collective in 2017 when I was an emerging curator. I traveled from where I live in Victoria, BC, to the complete other side of the country, Halifax, Nova Scotia, to attend a national gathering and meet with, develop relationships with, learn from colleagues of mine from across the country and internationally. And that was kind of the backbone of the organization since its founding was the goal of bringing together Indigenous curators and cultural workers and artists and academics and writers who at that time in the early 2000s, when we were beginning to work more within larger institutions, we felt really siloed. We felt alone in a lot of instances where we were in most cases, perhaps the only Indigenous person working within a museum or a gallery or a department. And so folks started talking amongst themselves about how we could support each other and meeting on a semi-regular basis to share best practices, to support one another's work, felt like a necessary thing to propel the folks in our field forward. And so it kind of started as a loose ad hoc collective of folks who knew each other, and it just grew and grew over the years through annual, sometimes biannual national gatherings in different cities across the country. At some point, there was some dedicated funding that was accessed so that some staff was able to be hired so that there could be a director leading the collective. But it's always been a pretty small organization.
And so, Justine, you're an artist and a digital programs and communications manager for ICAA or ICCA. Tell me how you started to get involved in your participation in this organization.
Sure. Thank you. So I should also specify too that I am Métis Swampy Cree on my father's side. How I got involved with ICCA, and I have almost an opposite story of Eli. I had never heard of them prior to working with them, which has been kind of a blessing in a way, but I'll get into that. When I left university, pursuing a Bachelor of Fine Arts, I wasn't sure how to keep making art, how to keep involved in the art world. Because I was like, oh shoot, now I've got the student loan I got to pay back. So I joined the Carfax Saskatchewan Arts Board, which is a nonprofit arts advocacy organization. And I've been on their board for 10 years, for a very long time. I think this is my last year, but they do some trips. And in doing so, I met Liz Barron, who I think at the time was working for Indigenous Protocols, which is affiliated with Carfax National. And through that, I found that ICCA was looking for somebody, and I was like, that sounds really cool. Tell me more. And yeah, one thing led to another. And now here I am, and I'm just kind of unearthing all this rich history of things that ICCA has done and bringing that kind of to the surface in a digital capacity.
Mm-hmm. What inspired each of you to join ICC? I mean, how does your personal journeys interact as artistics and creatives align with the organization's mission?
For myself, my involvement, my interests dovetailed quite nicely with my own curatorial practice, and so as I in the mid to in 2016, 2017, started to work with music festivals and film festivals as a programmer, as a curator, and then started working with galleries and media arts centers with my film background. I wanted to learn from and meet the other Indigenous curators across the country. And so when I took a position at an artist-run center in Victoria called Open Space, one of the oldest artist-run centers in the world, it felt like a necessary component of my work here on the west coast of Canada to be connected and in relationship with my colleagues across the country, but also there's an international component of the ICCA, which I'll talk about later when we go in more into the programs. But for me, as a practicing curator, it was a really important part of my own growth and development, and just learning about the field.
How about you, Justine?
For me, I've been finding kind of a way. I've been trying to get back to the arts since going down the professional, like I'm going to have a job first road, and so this is a way back to connect with arts and culture and the things that when you're young and 20, you're like, that's what I want to do when I grow up. So it's kind of a way to connect back to that. So that's why I.
Well, the ICC prioritizes and amplifying Indigenous voices in the arts. Can you share and think of specific examples of how the organization has supported artists and the curators in their work?
If you don't mind, I'll lead this one. So one thing that has been consistent since Aboriginal Curatorial Collective, when it first started, has been a lot of the publications that's been produced, and that is primarily the project that I oversee, is the Digital Publications Project. So there was a lot of essays and critical writing, creative essays, reviews, things that have been generated by the ICCA, but through time, rebranding, staff turnover, some of those things have been lost. So I've been slowly collecting them back. And it's given me a real idea of the history of contribution that ICCA has given to having Indigenous curatorial practices and artists be celebrated in like a tangible, physical way. So yeah, there's been lots of partnerships through publications and lots of different programs and funding, and it's all kind of, there's always been like little one-off things that have always led to this,
right,
which has been really nice. So I think just in that tiny program of publications, which isn't really tiny, but just in that alone, It's giving a lot of Indigenous artists and curators support. Sometimes, a gallery will say, we don't have the budget for publication completely on our own, and we can go in and say, hey, can we partner with you for a critical essay or something, or working with magazines and just to make sure that there is representation.
Well, Eli, as director of programming, what are some of the most impactful programs or initiatives you worked on?
The main project that I've been working on over that period of time, but I also just want to touch on what Justine was saying about the history of the ACC and the ICCA, and those have been the two pillars of the organization: gatherings and writing. That's what was identified from the very first kind of meeting of folks, was that's what needed to happen. And so it's really beautiful for this new kind of staff complement that we have right now. Justine and I are 2/3 of that. Justine mentioned our colleague Liz Barron, who's my co-director, director of operations. And we really want to tighten our mandate back to gatherings and critical discourse and writing. There were previous programs that were really impactful for folks. A colleague of ours, Tara Hogue, is one of the top Indigenous curators in the country, I would say in North America. They're adjunct at Ramey Modern in Saskatoon. They were previously on our board of directors, and when we were doing some strategic planning last fall, they talked about how their first interaction with the ACC was when they were in high school in Red Deer, and there was previously a mentorship program, which at that time, when we really didn't have a lot of folks from our community going into curatorial studies programs, was a gateway for folks. It was an accessible way for folks to, I guess, just become aware of these possibilities in the art world. And so we're not doing things like mentorship programs currently. We may in the future, but I've been working on a delegations initiative where we're taking small groups of Indigenous curators to different events and gatherings and sites around the world over a period of a year. And we're just about to leave for Honolulu to attend the Hawaii Triennial in a couple of weeks. But I can talk more about that later or after.
Fill it in anytime. Well, Justine, as the digital programs and communications manager, how has ICCA embraced digital platforms to connect with Indigenous communities and share their work more broadly, especially with Indigenous communities that are very rural and don't have access or capabilities?
That's a really, really good question. So the ICCA was founded by, and I cannot remember everybody, but one of them was a Hasu. And them as an artist was very much so doing like web-based and digital art back when the internet was just learning to walk. Yeah. So I think that ICCA has always had, I guess, an interest in being digital and being progressive in a digital context, which has really helped us stay relevant. So, yeah, that's the short answer.
Well, Eli, your work in filmmaking and beadwork focuses on Indigenous cultural resurgence. How do you see your personal art practice influencing your role at ICCA?
Well, I guess it's two sides of one coin. Being a curator, having a curatorial practice is it's almost like being a translator in some ways, but with a lot of care involved. So when I was working at a gallery for the previous 5-6 years before taking this position, it was the foundational part of that job was supporting artists to bring their ideas and dreams to reality, and to also be able to protect them in some ways from the institution, and sometimes audience. Like if you have a settler audience who is prone to asking ignorant, sometimes insulting questions of artists, I felt it necessary to buffer that and get in the way of that. So it helped, like being an artist first helped me develop a curatorial practice which forefronted the work of artists. And then being a curator helped me develop certain parts of my artistic practice that may not have been as much of a focus before, such as grant writing or just writing in general, and being able to frame your work, right, and to kind of translate it for a public audience.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Well, Justine, your artistic practice blends high art with pop culture. How does the perspective shape your approach to engaging communities and promoting ICCA's initiatives and its mission?
That's a tricky one.
I got lots of them.
Admittedly, since I guess reconnecting with my Indigenous roots, my art practice has kind of fallen by the wayside because I'm not really sure how to talk about being Indigenous at the same time as my interests of like commercialism, and the intersection of pop culture as it relates to Indigenous people is like inherently problematic. So I'm like, I don't really know how to move forward with that. But I will say that I love ICCA's branding. So I get to be playful with our social media posts, and I get to bring in all these colors, and I get to bring that pop culture, I guess, vibe to the branding and keep it still fresh and fun. So I feel like that's how my artistic practice kind of informs my role at ICCA. If that answers the question.
Well, both of you are involved in creating opportunities for the next generation of Indigenous artists. What roles, and let me rephrase this, what role does mentorship play in the work of ICCA and in your personal careers, especially in the roles that you have at the organization, but seeing the needs, how do you fulfill that?
I guess I'll hop in and just say, well, we're both parents. We both have young ones that we see the need of growing up in a world where barriers to opportunities and, barriers produced by shame and trauma are removed. And so I think that really does inform not just like our work on a day-to-day basis, but I think that it really does inform the organization in terms of some policies and, like we have like a family policy. So, being parents, I think that mentorship is really important, and we see that we want our children to grow up with seeing that being an artist or curator is not just like a viable career, but a desirable one and an impactful one.
I completely agree. The role of mentorship in my own life and career has been central to this work that I do and that we do in the organization. I was encouraged to apply for my first curator role at an art gallery by the person who is leaving that position, kind of a senior curator in the country, and they mentored me in that role. And then one of the major programs at that gallery was a youth mentorship art program, which kind of mentored emerging Indigenous artists over a year leading up to a professional exhibition. And for a lot of them, the first time that they were showing their work in a gallery. And I've been thinking of that while in this role and while developing our curatorial delegations program. Some of the more emerging or junior curators that were accepted into that program, this will be the first time that they're traveling to like a large international art event. And I know for myself the impact that can have on the way you move through the world, the way that you can bring those experiences back home and have that inform the work that you do.
And it's very unfortunate that a lot of Indigenous artists in rural communities don't have the access to mentorship. That's one of the key aspects of, I think, trial and tribulations that they go through, but also they face barriers to visibility and recognition being in rural communities. How does ICCA work to break down these barriers and create more of equitable opportunities for Indigenous, urban environments, more of rural areas?
Well, I think, I don't know, I think it may just look a lot differently in rural areas. And I want to, I think when we embarked on our delegations program and went on our first trip to Santa Fe last summer for Indian Art Market in August, it opened my eyes to the similarities and the differences between Indigenous artists in Canada and Native American artists in the United States. And there are a lot of parallels, I think, with folks who are, say, growing up in rural, reserve, or reservation communities, and where so-called like mentorship, which we may put into a certain category or box when we live in an urban area, can just happen really naturally on the res, where like you're just like hanging out with your family and you're learning from them, but it may not be like a part of a program or a project that's like offered or delivered in a city, in an urban area. So I think it may just like, it may look differently, but a colleague of mine who's coming to Hawaii on this next delegation, she lives on her reserve, far away from any urban center. And the reason that I wanted them to come to Hawaii is because I know that the way that the triennial there has been put together, and how some of the folks that we're going to meet in Hawaii, the Kanaka curators' work, is very much grounded in community and home, and it isn't necessarily based towards like a large like urban audience. And so that is something that I want to keep in mind, because so much of this work is done at large like public museums and galleries in large urban centers. And how can we still like offer opportunities and really keep in touch with our community members who don't live in cities.
As somebody who born and raised city, I'm definitely an urban Indian, and I'm kind of mid-career now, so I find myself being more and more being a mentor. I still find that I'm craving mentorship, and I'm also like craving that community that I think maybe a lot of rural Indigenous people or people who live on their communities on the res, they get these natural mentorships. It's not a formal mentorship because they have their family and they have elders and knowledge keepers in their community that are guiding them. And so I think that there's it's like there's two worlds kind of coexisting, and both are craving the same things from a different side of a coin, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
We're all craving mentorship and community in different ways.
Correct. Absolutely true. Well, there's a lot of something in the air that's affecting North America in general and the political atmosphere in funding for organizations, especially for funding these type of organizations, both on the north and south side of the border.
I can talk a little bit about the advocacy work that myself and Liz work on. We're a national organization. We're deemed a NASO, a National Arts Service Organization, and so we work locally, provincially, and federally with funders and other arts organizations to advocate for more and sustainable funding models. In April, we're going to be traveling to New York on a delegation. We're going to be going to Forge Project in the Hudson Valley, which to me is one of the leading examples around the world of a Native-led organization, which is imagining a new model of sustainability. Now, their model so far has been to work with a billionaire patron who's been able to float the organization quite a bit, and we're all not as lucky to have one of those around. But it's a big part of our mandate and what we work on week to week, supporting other organizations to be able to survive these kind of ebbs and flows of funding. And I know right now we're bracing for a clawback. And how do we get through that? How do we survive that? And I also think it's in Canada, in what has been called by some an era of reconciliation, like post Truth and Reconciliation Commission. There was a crest of that wave of work of institutional change and funding that reflected that. In a lot of ways, it feels like that is like receding. That the momentum, energy, and funding is starting to fall back, and so we're trying desperately to try and maintain the strides and the work that has been done by our colleagues. And you need money to do that. We've had international board members for a number of years. When I first attended a national gathering in Halifax in 2017, I met colleagues from New Zealand and some other Pacific Islands, Maori curators. There's a colleague who's now based in Montreal, Dr. Leuli Ashragi, who was a big connector between the ICCA because Leuli was going to school at Concordia, but then doing a lot of work back in Australia and Samoa. So that has informed, and the involvement of Kanaka curators from Hawaii, Maori curators from New Zealand, Aboriginal curators from Australia. I would say those are the larger areas where we have relationships and contact currently. Their involvement in our national gatherings has been pretty continuous, and our delegations to Hawaii upcoming will be a way for us to build more of those relationships. We were also just successful with funding through a partnership with a foundation in New Zealand, Patica Foundation. They're also an art museum. They applied to Creative New Zealand for funding over 3 years to bring Maori and other Indigenous curators who are based in New Zealand to join our delegations or to come to our national gatherings in Canada. So that'll be a lot of great, sharing and relationship building.
Fantastic. Well, Justine, looking back at your time with ICCA, are there any particular projects or events that stand out as especially meaningful to you?
I have not even worked at ICCA for quite a year yet. I'm just coming up to a year. So they've been, there hasn't been as many, but I've got some that I'm looking forward to that are coming up, like our gathering in November. We're still working out the details of that. We're also co-partnering in an upcoming one in June, and with the ARCA, the Artist Run Centers of Canada Association, I think it is. But our gathering in Toronto is really impactful, and meeting our international board was really cool. And I guess that's the events, but the program I think that I'm most excited for is we're working on an archive. So we're working to build an Indigenous curatorial archive that documents and hosts. So far right now, it's looking like we're going to have mostly Canadian Indigenous content, but I'm hoping that it does open up to all Indigenous curators and artists, and having like an exhibition timeline of all of our people across Turtle Island, so that there's just to show that we've always been here and been practicing and doing things, even in I guess, like an academic, professional art curatorial sense.
Well, then it also stands to the fact of that part of the name. It's a collective, and Indigenous culture is a collective of many, not just one sector or one region. One of the aspects here in the south of Turtle Island, a lot of non-natives still do not understand to this day that there's over 500 federally recognized tribes in the U.S. They think we're all one people, just live, from different areas. So I think having something like that that's more interconnected and collaborative and collective is beneficial to organizations such as ICCA.
Yeah, I agree. I also think it complements Eli's program, his delegations program, because all the interconnectedness really breaks down those geographical arbitrary boundaries that we set upon ourselves.
True.
The gathering that Justine mentioned in Toronto last fall was really beautiful. It was kind of a mini gathering, our AGM, but a way to bring our board together and some of the participants of our first delegation to Santa Fe. So that was really nice to be able to share back to some of our community what that program meant for participants to be able to go somewhere like that. I think the delegation after that was probably the most impactful one for me, going to Venice, Italy, to attend a convening at the Biennale around Jeffrey Gibson's exhibition. The convening was called "If I Read You What I Wrote, Bear in Mind I Wrote It." Yeah. And it was organized by Bard College. That was my first time in Europe. And to be able to go to the Biennale in a year where not only did Jeffrey Gibson become the first Native American artist to,
True.
Am I glitching out? Okay.
No. She was giving a snap like a congrats.
To kind of do a solo at the U.S. Pavilion. But as far as the awards that are given out, the Golden Lions, they were both taken by Indigenous artists this year. Archie Moore's exhibition Kith and Kin at the Australian Pavilion was probably the most moving exhibition, or I guess exhibition I've ever seen, installation. And then the Matahoa Collective took the lion for best work by a collective So I think, and also having a curator from the global south really shaped the perspective of the Giardini and the Arsenale and the big group exhibition. There were so many artists from the global south, indigenous, queer. It was a really beautiful and overwhelming experience, but to also meet some heroes like Jolene Rickard is at Tuscarora, curator and academic. She's a hero for many of us in this field, and to hear her do a keynote in Venice about Jeffrey's work and tying that together with her decades of research was just like really impactful.
I think our time is now, and it's not just going to be 15 minutes. I think our story is being heard, and hopefully it continues onward for Indigenous Native Americans. Well, what exciting projects or initiatives are on the horizon for ICCA, and how do you envision the organization continuing to grow and evolve, especially during somewhat of a turbulent political time on a global scale? How important it is to have these type of organizations and the missions that they project.
With funding being kind of like everybody's just holding their breath a little bit to see kind of how things play out with the
Right.
current social and political climate. I think that what I'm looking forward most is seeing how organizations like ours respond to challenges like funding, because I think that Eli had talked about like sustainability in terms of funding, but I think that there's also going to be, and it ties back to that conversation about mentorship and succession planning and how we're engaging with our communities for that support, so that even if funding is lost, that we can still collaborate and partner with other organizations to still offer value to our memberships and somewhat stay afloat, hopefully. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I know it sounds really like you know, weirdly optimistic, but I'm looking this at, Indigenous people are resilient across the board, and so an Indigenous organization is only going to show other organizations how to be resilient in times of scarce funding.
I've learned and thought about since traveling to the US to do different kinds of work as like an artist, doing residencies and just learning about the different models of funding. Like we're pretty lucky up here to have like municipal, provincial, federal arts councils, which some artists can just live off of those grants. That's wonderful. And when I've talked with American counterparts, they're like, "That's wild! Like we don't have things like that, or on a very different scale." But as our councils, have some of their envelopes threatened, I'm looking to how organizations in the States are funded, which are like in a large part foundations. And those foundations are not as affected if they're private philanthropic enterprises to say like the changing tides or winds of political power. So I'm interested in us looking at what kind of foundations would want to support the work of us and colleagues up in Canada, and to kind of try and diversify our models, and because we want to be doing more work down in the United States when we traveled to Santa Fe, and that being such a meeting place for Native American artists from all over the US in August. We were having a lot of conversations about there isn't an analog to the ICCA in the United States. And so we want to do more work down there to bring together curators, American-based curators. And so that may mean us accessing money from down there. But yeah, those are some of the ways that I'm thinking about sustainability and ensuring that we have the resources to do the work that we know is really needed.
Exactly. Well, like you said, Justine, we have to be resilient. It's part of our DNA. We don't take no for an answer. We just keep on moving forward.
No, and two, I wanted to also touch on, I know that Eli had said like in the post-Truth and Reconciliation that a lot of the funding is going away. I think that's government funding. I think we're going to start to see a lot of, and maybe I'm speaking from like a Canadian business climate, that a lot of Canadian corporations are looking to make impacts in answering the calls to action for truth and reconciliation. And I think it's Indigenous-led cultural organizations like our own that are going to be the ones that say, you can help us, we'll help you with that.
Right,
Let's work
right.
together and make that happen. So yeah, I definitely think that the private sector is going to
It's going to take a huge, yeah.
have
Well,
a
for
big part.
Indigenous artists and curators who are just starting their journey, what advice would both of you have to give them navigating the art world and stay true to their cultural identities, but also to their own path of how they want to contribute and be a part of the Native American art world in general?
Network, meet people. I remember in university, and I did not heed this advice, and I am heeding this advice now. Nobody's going to go to your art show if you don't go to theirs. If you're a curator and you have an exhibition,
Mm-hmm.
invite people, but also go to other curators' exhibitions. If you're an artist with an opening, go attend other openings. Make sure that you're engaging in the community of the industry, not just your own community of personhood.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it kind of again touches on that's where you find mentors. That's where you find people who are interested in what you're doing. That's where you find opportunities. That's where you learn things. That's where you get inspired. So
Absolutely.
I
Get out of
couldn't
your
agree
bubble.
more. That is
mhm.
like you were telling the story of like how I fell into this world was showing up and attending things and I would extend that to like going like traveling outside of where you live and meeting other people in different places that are doing things different ways, perhaps because looking at the landscape across North America, like curators in LA are doing things different than in Chicago, than are doing things differently than in New York, and you can learn a lot. And that's like perhaps maybe a privileged outlook to say like just go like travel and meet people, but like as much as you can be exposed to other ways of doing things and seeing things and study with people who you want to learn from. And um mentorship can look so many different ways, and it can be informal or formal, and just yeah, meet as many people as you can in this field.
Well, is there a favorite Indigenous artist or work that inspires either of you?
I think Christy Belcourt for me. I love, I've actually, I didn't always think I'd be an artist. I actually thought I was going to be a fashion designer, and seeing, their work and their artistic practice inspire fashion and inspire, I would say like traditional, conventional, fashion design, inspiring some of these designer houses that have been around for long before Canada, or, before
Mm-hmm.
people have come over here, and they've, so I love seeing that an Indigenous artist is impacting things on just like a global scale, but also taking it from looking like craft work and beading artisan, and elevating it to being that high art. I know that like one of my non-Indigenous favorite artists, Takashi Murakami, often talks about the flat art theory,
Mm-hmm.
and how, low culture and high art are eventually going to come to a point where it's all homogenous. And so I love seeing Indigenous art.
Kith and Kin by Archie Moore. at the Australian Pavilion in Venice. I think that is an installation I'll think about for years and years to come. But I also want to mention, just as a filmmaker, um, I think my favorite filmmaker is Sky Hopinka, who's Native American. He's Ho-Chunk. He made a feature film a few years ago called Mothni, and I think I come back to that at least once a year since seeing it. And as somebody who has made work around language revitalization, the way that Sky incorporated the Chinook jargon language, where he's from like around, I think, the Wisconsin area, but he went to school in the Pacific Northwest, and while he was living there, he learned the local Indigenous language and has friends there that speak the language. And so
Wow.
a big portion of that film is in Chinook, and it's so beautiful. There's subtitles that are in English. There's also flip subtitles in Chinook at certain points. So it's one of those, like, to me, like, groundbreaking, thought-provoking examples of like truly like experimental film, and how our work and our practice does not have to be confined to these ideas around traditional Indigenous art or craft. That examples like this film by Sky are of just the true like breadth of our like genius and sophistication in modes of storytelling, and experimentation and dreaming of new worlds.
So, what's next for each of you independently and for ICCA? Justine, I'll have you go.
For me, I'm not sure. I think
Each day as it comes.
each day as it comes. Yeah. So I think for me, I definitely want to just make sure that I'm being more active in my local arts community than I have been in the past. I mean, raising kids will do that to you, but um, for the I'll let Eli speak to the organization. But yeah, for me personally, I'm not sure. I like to say yes to opportunities until I burn myself to the ground.
So I'm editing a film that I shot last summer with a UVic professor who's from she's Indigenous and she's from Russia, and it's a puppet film telling a traditional story from her territory in their language of Idleman. So we did like Czech style, like wooden puppets, like carved wooden puppets on marionettes, and also some shadow puppetry. So that's kind of a personal project. We're going to show it at a conference in Boulder, Colorado in March, the end of March, I think, an Arctic conference. So I have a hard deadline on that, and I need to be editing when I'm not with my 9-month-old baby at home. For the organization, we are really busy this year with a few more delegations. The 2 gatherings that Justine mentioned this summer in Ottawa, Gatineau, as a co-host of an ARCA national gathering, and our own national gathering November in Saskatchewan. We're redeveloping our membership program. Yeah, lots of work right now and on the horizon for all of us.
Well, before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to add that we didn't cover and you want to tell our listeners about ICCA?
I actually do want to touch on what Eli just said about our membership. So we are currently, and this is Eli's baby, that we are redeveloping the institutional membership. But in the discussion of like funding and such succession and sustainability, I think that if you are an arts organization who's looking to support and engage with an Indigenous organization, consider being an institutional member. It's one of the best ways that we can have recurring revenue, but also support their organizational goals in increasing Indigenous and Native American participation.
Fantastic. Well, I thank you both for coming on the show today. It was a pleasure to have you and meet you and have a little opportunity to chat, to learn about you and ICAA. So I think that's about it. And thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Much continued
Yeah, it's been a
success
great
going forward
conversation.
to the both of you.
Likewise.
Stories are living things. They grow when shared, and they guide us forward. Thank you to Justine and Eli of the Indigenous Curatorial Collective for reminding us that art is more than expression. It's preservation, connection, and renewal. This has been Beyond the Art. Until next time, keep creating, keep listening, and keep the story alive.